Greetings, everyone, and welcome back. We head farther south in our study of world regional geography. We're going to be taking a look in this particular section as to who lays claim to Antarctica, among several other things. And in fact, before we get started, let me just ask you to make a prediction here. Let's make a prediction. We've had some experience with prediction guides. Going to make a prediction um, regarding Antarctica. Bring up a world map on your phones and take a look at the region around Antarctica and make a prediction of what country or countries may lay claim to Antarctica. You might want to pick your top five. Right? What five countries would most likely be laying claim to Antarctica? And then we're done with the lecture. Just look back and see how accurate you were, or if anything surprises you. Turn to page 436, as a matter of fact, in your textbook too, and maybe that's all you need. But turn to page 436, and we're going to be taking a look at Australia in this particular study, New Zealand, the island countries, and Antarctica. You probably need 436 open at this juncture, if for nothing else. Before I get started with the lecture, or before you start listening to the lecture, you may want to just stop and take a look at the island countries, right? On page 436, and get familiarized where some of those are, as I'm going to be alluding to a couple of them during the lecture. So in this particular chapter, some of the major heads-up terms we're going to be taking a look at, and again, if you look at page 436, look at Australia, the Great Dividing Range, you can find that. I'll talk about that, a mountain chain across Australia. The land case, that was a campaign by the government to plant more trees. Aborigines, these are a native Australians. The Maoris, and the Maoris. When you say that, you got to roll the R, right? Ordinarily, I would say that don't try that at home, right? Leave that to the professionals. But um, you need to learn how to pronounce the Maoris if you are going to be speaking of them, right? So they are natives in New Zealand. The Aborigines natives to Australia, the Maoris natives to New Zealand. We'll talk about the White Australian policy. The White Australian policy, some immigration policies that the Australian government has played around with. Oceania. Oceania is Pacific Islands, right? The Pacific Islands. And then talk about maximum sustainable yield. Maximum sustainable yield is like if you're fishing in waters, and you got to be careful, or if you're cutting trees, right? You got to be careful you don't go too far to where you can never actually get the fish life, in this case for fishing, back to the original baseline that it was at when you started fishing. So maximum sustainable yield. So yes, the chapter 10 here, Australia, Oceania, and Antarctica. Let me set the first section up here. We're going to take a look at some fills here I have on my lecture model, and we're going to get into Australia right off the bat here. But the South Pacific lies along a transition of environments and peoples, and the region is one of contrasts. Some countries are among the world's wealthiest, and we've seen this a little bit and some of the other places too. Some of the world's wealthiest, while others are among the world's poorest. And as I alluded to, there are several indigenous groups practicing traditional and tribal lifestyles, but the region is playing an increasingly larger role in global affairs and therefore economics. And until recently, this region was characterized by geographic isolation and had a history of domination by external powers, Europeans, the Chinese, and South Asian influences have played a significant role in defining the cultural, the political, and economic character of the region. So let's take a look at some of the fills here for the first section. Here's Australia. Looking at my lecture model for the things that you need to know for the quiz, right? No tricks here. Australia integrated into the global economy. In fact, it's one of the world's wealthiest nations. Australia houses large deposits of iron ore in Western Australia, rocks from the Great Dividing Range of East Australia. I alluded to that mountain range at the top of all this. And that range provides coal and silver among many other minerals, right? So very, very valuable area for Australia. European explorers. European explorers came upon Australia in the 1800s, reproducing Western culture. However, they didn't really engage with the indigenous population, and in this case, the Aborigines. On figure 10.2, turn to figure 10.2, and what do I have there for figure 10.2? Figure 10.2. I'm thinking that was a picture of the Aborigines. Perhaps not. Well, turn to figure 10.2 for the light of time. I am unable to find it in a... There it is. All right, I'm there. Australia's Western culture, right? So you have a kind of a picture there of Australians celebrating a Australian tradition. They have their flags out. You see the Australian children, but like I said, they never really integrated with the indigenous population, the Aborigines. Now there have been regulations on mining. Now getting back to the mining in the dividing range, there have been regulations on mining. Mining licenses during the during recent times because of the effects of the mining extractions. Mining extractions, I think one of the major concerns with that is um, um, they're not very attractive, right? I mean, these big gouges in the sides of the mountains and hills. But the federal government there has legislated a campaign to build new trees, which began in the 1990s under the title Land Case. New Zealand, take a look at New Zealand. Like Australia, New Zealand has been integrated into the global economy. Relief from the elevations and runoff from the subsequent rainfall provide access to a fair amount of hydroelectric power. Limited natural resources, however, in New Zealand uh, exist in the country. Like Australia, Europeans arrived 1800s, uh, reproducing Western culture while not integrating with the indigenous peoples. Political decisions must be made in regard to controversial farm practices, auto emissions, and new dams that are also being constructed. The farm practices, and I think with your in the news coming up here later in the week, I think I'm going to um, factor this in um, as an option for in the news. But what happened there was, let's see if I can get this straight here. Um, Cow induction. It was about cow induction, and a hormone is used in this to cause cows to calve prematurely. I know that, but so I think what happens is they bring back late cows in life with the rest of the herd, um, preferably at about 6 or 7 months. And so a large, but here's the thing: a large number of these cows are born dead. So this is raising eyebrows and certainly getting certain farmers in the crosshairs of the government in New Zealand. Oh, the Oceanic islands. Let's take a look at the Oceanic islands. The islands have not been integrated into the global economy, although there was early contact with they had early contact with European whalers. Economically, it is dependent on external aid coming in from the outside. Nevertheless, they are not without precious metals and minerals such as copper deposits, nickel ore in New Caledonia on page 436. And you can see that on your map. And you have rainforest too on some of those larger islands. Contact with the Europeans wasn't until the later in the 1800s, although the Europeans really did not engage with the islanders. And then the mysterious Antarctica. The mysterious Antarctica, basically a scientific research lab, uh, scientific research laboratory. You have trans-Antarctic mountains there that are rich in mineral resources. And many countries, many countries claim segments of the continent. Kind of see how your prediction, how you made out in your prediction. In fact, right there on that point here, let's turn to figure, I think it's 1028. 1028 on page 462. And you can see there at the top, figure A, or no, figure B, the countries that lay claim, right, to Antarctica. And if you compare that with your map, page 436, or a world map, probably a world map would do, because some of these countries, I mean, if you're going to juxtapose this where um, various areas are, it would make sense, right? Like Australia would probably make a little more sense. They lay claim. New Zealand, right? Argentina, very, southern tip of South America. That would make sense. But then you have Norway, and the British, right? That probably would geographically wouldn't make sense. Now the Russians and the United States, they don't pay any attention to any of these claims. They basically say that it should be open to anyone who wants to do research. So just some comprehension questions for those of you who want to stop and ponder what was just talked about in that segment. Um, has the distance kept Australia and New Zealand from globalizing? How have the Pacific Islanders globalized? And what can be said about Antarctica, right? And then who claims it? Okay, when you're done answering those questions, you can turn to page 454. And I want to talk about these same countries. I want to talk about their economy, their culture, their um, their politics, right? Um, Urban change in each of those areas. Let me set this up as you look at page 454, perhaps, right? And you see an inset map there of Australia. The region's climates are largely tropical and heavily influenced by oceanic influences. Australia's vast interior is dominated by arid and semi-arid climates. Moist subtropical and mid-latitude climates are found at the region's northern and southern extremes. This region's home to a wide variety of animal and vegetation types, including the distinct marsupials of Australia, deforestation, some mining damage are among key human-induced environmental problems faced by the South Pacific countries. Australia and New Zealand both have strong European ties and, as I said earlier, affluent economies. They're increasingly being integrated into Asian markets, which would make geographic sense. The economies of both countries are based on exporting minerals and agricultural products. Tourism has increased over the past 25, 30 years. Now you got your first set of notes here to keep you guys awake. And look at Australia. And we're going to talk first here about the economy. And economy there, colon, first bullet point under that, sheep farming. Sheep farming enticed early immigrants from England and Europe. Sheep farming enticed early immigrants from England and Europe. And then your second bullet point, gold mining boom occurred in the 1850s, bringing more immigrants. So gold mining boom occurred in the 1850s, bringing more immigrants. And then a couple subpoints under that. The immigrants mainly came from England. Immigrants were mainly from England. And your second and last subpoint under that would be port cities were established. Port cities were established, and you could see by your map there on page 454, you could see those, plethora of port cities. Now, your third bullet point, after those subpoints, getting back to a bullet point under economy, Australia maintained economic contacts with Europe during this period. Australia maintained economic contacts with Europe during this period. And then the last bullet point under the economy would be free trade was open, right? Free trade was open. Now let's take a look at culture. The Aborigines were already on the continent when the Europeans arrived. The Aborigines were basic nomad hunters. And I know what this picture is here. I have page 446 there. And 446 is a photograph of an Aborigine family boarding the back of a pickup truck. Now, the Dutch arrived in Australia in the 1600s, and then the British, right? Kind of like South Africa, right? The Dutch Boer farmers were there first and kicked out by the British. Of course, the British were at the Dutch, what became the Dutch West Indies, over in East Asia, and the Dutch kicked them out. Someone's always kicking someone else out, right? With the Europeans, but the Brits were looking to set up a penal settlement for impoverished Brits who could not pay off their debts back home. We're talking late 1700s here. And just kind of an interesting FYI for those of you who are not aware of this. The Brits' initial penal settlement was Georgia, right? So early Australian, American colonial history, people who lived in the Carolinas were, always a little nervous about these criminals, that were in Georgia. Georgia was basically a penal settlement. Uh, kind of, you know, don't know if you have too much to worry about, in a violent sense with regarding people who don't pay off their debts, but there was some nervousness about that, I guess, in the Carolinas. But and nevertheless, you know, funny thing happened on the right way, right? The British were kicked out of. Here we go with getting the kickouts again. The British were kicked out of 13 colonies and had to find another place for they put impoverished debtors, right, and make them pay off their debts. And Australia became the place. The Aussies paid little attention to the Aborigines. Today, the Aborigine population comprises 2% of the continent. Politics in Australia. Politics. Government was forced to get involved in national infrastructure due to the early influx of settlers. And they established a Commonwealth in 1901, right? So Australia becomes a Commonwealth of England, the English Empire, 1901. And they soon, therefore, established a white Australia policy, that encouraged European immigration, while at the same time discouraging immigration from other parts of the globe. And this is primarily aimed at luring British immigrants, right? You want to acculturate, the new colony with those of like mind, right? Policy change, though, in 1972. A policy change in 1972 that included migrants. From all over the globe. High unemployment, though, in the 1990s led to national curbs again on immigration. So in the last couple of decades, since the mid 90s, boat people have been intercepted trying to get to Australia, a wealthy continent. Boat people have been intercepted and shipped to internment camps on the island of Nauru. If you go back to your map on page 436, Nauru is a island just north of, you can see the Solomon Islands, but some internment camps, believe it or not, have been set up there for the intercepted migrants, right? And of course, this is igniting outcries from human rights groups. I'll have to take a look at my in the news list. That might be a good one to check out too. So by the time I'm done with this lecture, I might forget that. So if any of you guys are interested in that one, shoot me an email when you look at the in the news and say, hey, Professor, I'm interested in those internment camps on Nauru. Can you, post that, some instructions on the in the news. And then, of course, I think probably maybe perhaps a good discussion question for even later in the week would, why do you suppose the Australian government does this? Now, why do they do this? And I know it's not popular, but one of my philosophies of education is take the positions that the majority of the popular culture does not, right? And I don't know if I'm going to do this with discussion questions, but it'd probably be an interesting one. Why do you think the Australian government does this? This immigration policy, intercepting folks, putting them on camps, and defend the position, defend it. Urban change in Australia, concentrated in urban areas along the coasts. All right, page 450. We'll highlight that point. Location fuels much trade. 90% of the population live in the cities. And because of the development of the ports and the uninhabitable nature, right, of the interior of Australia, people are congregating there. Page 451, there's an interesting population table of the entire region that I would encourage you to check out. Now, let's take a look at New Zealand. Take a look at New Zealand, their economy, culture, politics, urban change. New Zealand's economy, sheep farming. Sheep farming burgeoned in the 1880s with the advent of refrigeration. And most exports went to Europe. Most of their exports went to Europe. Like Australia, they maintained economic contacts with Europe, as well as conducting open free trade. The service sector. The service sector is a fast-growing sector of New Zealand's economy. Much emigration out of New Zealand to Australia, however, though, for employment. Culture. The Maoris. M-A-O-R-I-S. M-A-O-R-I-S. Just realized I don't have the spelling lists on your lecture models this time around. The Maoris. Got to roll that R. Remember that. Arrived in New Zealand from the South Pacific in the 1880s. Or 800s, I'm sorry. In the 800s AD. They resisted British missionaries, right? Anytime as we talked about before, British colonized, in a more humanitarian sense, the British missionaries would come in behind all that and look to Christianize the natives. Well, the Maoris resisted this. They resisted it. The British missionaries were not able to go back home to their churches and report a lot of success stories, I guess, right? Unlike the Aussies, though, the Aussies' outlook toward the Aborigines, the New Zealanders respected Maori land ownership. And then more immigrants came due to an 1860 gold rush on New Zealand. The politics. New Zealand gained political autonomy from Britain in 1907. The Maoris integrated much more easily than the Aborigines in Australia. And that looks like a good quiz question right there. Just saying for next week. Urban change. 86% of the folk live in urban areas. Makes sense since the origin of the cities were at one time ports. Well, still are. The cities act as kind of links to overseas markets and the country's interior. So, just some comprehension questions there for those of you who want to stop and absorb, internalize the learning. Who integrated? Who was integrated into the fabric of their economies? The Maoris in New Zealand or the Aborigines in Australia? Who was on the continent? On Australia before as nomad hunters. All right, and what was the white Australian policy? What was the white Australian policy? Take a look now at what's going on with the island countries. And again, probably the best map in this section would be 436, I'm thinking. And again, look at that. Try to get you familiarized with that particular subregion, right, of the region we're taking a look at. You set this up while you look at that. The South Pacific Island subregion consists of, and you can see that there, a large number of small islands, most with very small populations. Most of these islands gained their independence in the 1970s, but economic hardships have kept most of these islands linked to Australia, New Zealand, the U.S., and former European colonial powers. And aside from Papua New Guinea, most of the countries that are region are very small and possess few natural resources. Mining does occur on a few of the islands, but most reserves are limited. And even there, they're bringing in folks from Japan and China to work a lot of those, a lot of those industries. An important element of economic development has been through tourism, but access to the islands is highly variable, resulting in few islands with well-organized tourist facilities. All right, let's take a look at some of the fills here for the stuff you need to know. A lack of global political and economic influence has negatively affected the living standards of the islands of Oceania. Tourism provides the greatest potential for the island countries to improve their quality of life. Economic difficulties, internal strife, economic and military dependence upon outsiders, such as the French and the United States, are an impediment toward regional development. Turn to figure 1013. That's that chart I like, right? With consumer goods, what percentage of people have consumer goods, certain consumer goods, water access, and energy usage. And you can compare, New Zealand, Australia, and the island countries. Once you're done with that, you can go back to the fill in the blanks here, and I say there that there are few natural resources, for the exception of copper and gold in Papua New Guinea. There's nickel in Caledonia, and phosphate in Nauru. It's the phosphate in Nauru that is large. That's where you have a lot of people being brought in from other East Asian countries, right? Japan, China, and so forth. So the countries are small in size, and as a result, they're not, big enough to diversify. There's been large-scale cutting of timber and expenses of maximum sustainable yield of fish life, and the depletion of resources, such as the phosphate in Nauru. Again, maximum sustainable yield, the concern that you're going to, use so much timber, or, uh, eat so much fish that you're not going to be able to get back to a stable baseline when all that started in earnest. So just some comprehension questions there, along with the U.S. Who has made these folks dependent on their colonizers? What tensions are there? What tensions, and who's it between? What are the economic activities of the islanders? What are the economic activities, and how important is that economic activity, right, to the islands? And then lastly, as I said before, the mysterious Antarctica. You could turn to Now turn to figure 1028 in your textbooks. Figure 1028 while I briefly set this section up. Although Antarctica is included in this chapter, its lack of permanent population and vast frozen expanse make its inclusion in a world region problematic. Antarctica's large resource base is virtually unexploited, but fishing activity in the surrounding oceans has increased since 1980, last 40 years. The continent's used for weather and marine ecosystem research, and a small amount of cruise-based tourism. Got a little white space here for a couple of points. First bullet point, the countries send commercial cruise ships with tourists to the continent. And figure 1028A, you could see, I think one of those captions there, you can see a cruise ship. While others, the United States included, reserve the right to make future claims. There were regulations in 1982 to curb commercial fishing. Commercial cruise ships take tourists to the continent. Let's see figure 1029A2. At present, there are no treaties regulating tourism. And what happens there is, I mean, there are permits. There are permits that cruise ships must have, but and then once the cruise ships, get to the perimeters of Antarctica, they include helicopters. The cruise ships include helicopters, and then when folks, get over onto the land base of Antarctica, they will ski, mountaineer, or maybe look to visit the South Pole. These types of things, and I gotta tell you, just to be personal about it, I look at those cruise ships, and you will not be able to get me on one of those things. I just look at those things as hives for sicknesses, right? I'm really, really digressing here. I just, some people don't like the sound of a nails going down a chalkboard, right? That type of thing. I just, makes my skin crawl to see, uh, one of those, a picture of a cruise ship, right? Someone gets sick on there, everybody gets sick. Well, good chance of that, right? Can't go anywhere unless you get to your destination and you can get off the ship. Last bullet point here, I have a fill for you. Treaties have been signed as a basis to keep Antarctica from being exploited. All the research stations just pour unwanted sewage into the ocean, as well as dump oil drums in the areas that are used for, for birds and for birds nesting areas. Figure 1027, you could take a look at that in connection to that point. Okay, that's a wrap on the lecture part of lecture notes of chapter 10. If you have a graphic organizer, we will just visually wrap this up here. Australia, Oceania, and Antarctica. Australia, one of the world's wealthiest nations. Minerals among the Great Dividing Range. Did not engage with indigenous aborigines. 90% of today's population live in urban areas. There was, development of ports, and the interior of the country is uninhabitable by folks who are living on the perimeters. The economy, sheep farming, early immigrants. Immigrants came from England, and they maintained economic contact with Europe. Free trade was therefore open. Culturally, Aborigines were the indigenous peoples, 2% of the population today. The Dutch armed the British, arrived before the British, didn't arm the British, they arrived before the British, and the British kicked them out and set up a penal colony, right, for debtors. Politics became a commonwealth in 1901. They adopted a immigration policy called the White Australian Policy, and that policy was lifted in 1972, but kind of came back to some degree in the 1990s. Curbs were put on immigration. New Zealand, right? New Zealand, no integration with the indigenous peoples. Europeans arrived in the 1800s, integrated into the world economy. New Zealand did, and their economy, breaking that down here, a growing service sector. Right, sheep farmers in the 1880s, though, that's how they came. Sheep farmers exporting business to Europe, free open trade, and today, again, your service sectors, they're leading industries there. Culturally, right, the Maoris arrived from the South Pacific in the 800s. British farmers emigrate there. The Maori land is respected by the British, and many more immigrants came due to an 1860 gold rush on New Zealand. Politics, New Zealand gained their autonomy from Britain in 1907, and the Maoris, right, were integrated. Yeah, right. The Maoris were integrated into New Zealand society. The Oceanic islands, lack of global contact has hurt the economy. Tourism provides economic hope. Few natural resources. The countries are just too small to diversify. They have not been integrated in the global economy. Dependent on a lot of external aid. Contact with Europeans in early 1800s, who did not engage with the islanders. And then lastly, Antarctica, right? Science Research Lab, rich in mineral resources. Many countries claim segments. Commercial cruise ships are sent with tourists. Treaties keep Antarctica from exploration, and there are no regulations on tourism. Ships must have a permit. That's about as far as it goes up to the current hour, right? Okay, let's take a look at what's up ahead, and you guys kind of getting the drill on this. Probably not much is going to change here. Let's see here. Oops. Bounce myself out of that. Excuse me. I don't know what happened there. Wednesday, I'm going to have a guided practice activity that's going to be due, and I'm going to have some videos. Make sure you look at the videos, right? I mean, some of you guys are still getting hurt with the later activities because there are things I want you guys to be able to answer. Some of the details on the questions that deal with, the lecture models. Certainly the lecture model should be the hub of your answers, right? Starting from there. And then sometimes the videos and the readings, right? And it's for your own education too, right? We're in college. We're in this for an education. I know you guys I know that you are swamped with other things, so I don't ever want to pretend or think that my class is the only one. I try not to do that. But, the videos are short. I mean, they're short. And what I'm going to do there is, and everything's always pegged to the quiz, by the way, right? You guys should know that by now. Everything's pegged to the quiz. I'm going to take that activity. I'm going to have you guys, just make some application with some of the things we've learned. And I shouldn't say anything more about that because I'm still developing in my mind, formulating what I want to do with that on Wednesday. But it'll be an activity we're going to have to provide some application, some analysis, and put some things together. It's going to be a little bit more than just comprehension. Thursday in the news, of course. Friday through Sunday, the discussion questions. And then Monday, pardon me, the obligatory quiz, right, on chapter 10. I think that will be it from here. There we go. I don't know how. I apologize for that. I didn't know how to. I didn't even know how to enlarge the screen there. I am definitely um, challenged a little bit with the tech stuff. But you guys know how to get a hold of me, right? Feel free to drop me emails, and you have my phone number too, right? If you need to call, I have the hours on the syllabus of when I am available to pick that phone up. I do have face-to-face classes, so sometimes I'm not always available to answer right away, but I am checking throughout the day at my regular place of work to see if I'm needed. So until next time, I will see you guys again. Have just a fantastic week, and do well in everything indeed.